Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on breathwork training for mountaineers. We're psyched you're here. My name is Mary Brown, and I'm the guide manager at Alpine Ascents. I'll be moderating the chat and our Q&A session at the end. This afternoon, we're diving into a powerful and often overlooked tool for high-altitude success, your breath. Whether you're headed to Denali, prepping for Rainier, or just want to feel stronger and more dialed at altitude, this session is packed with strategies to help you breathe better, go further, and recover faster. We're thrilled to welcome Anthony Lorubbio as our guest speaker. Anthony is the founder and head coach at Recal Training and the creator of the High Altitude Breathwork Training Program for mountain athletes. He's triple certified in breathwork, including the Oxygen Advantage, and is currently pursuing his master's in exercise physiology. Anthony isn't just about theory. He's tested these techniques on himself in some wild ways, like the nasal marathon, need to hear more about that later, and the sea level to 14er challenge. Since launching his program, he's helped over 100 athletes summit peaks like Kilimanjaro, Aconcagua, and even 8,000-meter peaks in the Himalayas. After 2 years of full-time van life, Anthony now calls Boulder home, where he lives with his partner Monica and their husky mix Luna. His dream? Climbing Alma de Blanc, nose breathing all the way naturally. So grab a notebook, get comfy, and get ready to unlock some game-changing tools for your next climb. If you have questions throughout the presentation, pop them in the Q&A box and we'll answer them at the very end. While Anthony is getting set up, let's get the chat going. Pop your name, where you're streaming in from, and what you're hoping to climb this summer while breathing through your nose. Okay, Anthony, over to you.
Nice little add in there. Yes, everybody, from here on out during our presentation today, I want you breathing through your nose entirely, unless I tell you otherwise. No, I'm just kidding. So thanks to everybody for joining. I'm seeing so much awesome activity in the chat. I want to shout out Renee for being from my home state of Ohio, and she's going to be climbing Denali hopefully this May. I see a lot of people from something like a sea level type of level, yet you are climbing, you have some high ambitions, no pun intended. We've got Beto from Ecuador. So many awesome people. Mont Blanc is on the radar. We've got somebody from Wisconsin. I lived in Wisconsin for a little while. So anyway, thanks so much, everybody, for being awesome, being here, and having such high ambitions in the mountains. As Mary said, I'm Anthony Lorubbio. I am a breathwork training coach, and if no one even knows what that is, by the end of the next hour, you certainly will know what it is. And I'm thrilled to be here with you. So I want to start off our conversation just by positioning the topic that we're going to be diving into. And the way that I want to do that is by diving into a little article excerpt from the Sweat Science column in Outside Magazine. Some of you may be familiar with this. Some of you may be familiar with the author, Alex Hutchinson. He's the author of a book called and in his article here, he talks about the implications of altitude on our respiratory system. And what he says is, when you head to altitude, you have to breathe more deeply and more frequently to compensate for the scarcity of oxygen in that thin air. That means that the muscles that you use to inhale, as well as exhale, by the way, I'll add, have to work harder than normal. In fact, those muscles consume 15 to 30% of the total amount of oxygen that you're inhaling while at altitude. And those muscles that are working harder, they eventually get tired. So training these muscles should prepare you to handle the extra workload of breathing at altitude. I'm here to talk about the ways in which we can actually train those muscles and the real tried, true, research tested, the way that hundreds of our athletes here at Recal have actually used these training methods to then handle that extra workload of breathing at altitude. So our agenda here today, and please do continue to throw in some of your personal notes in the chat. I will be casually taking a look at those as we go, and maybe even calling out a few like Marisa, who I met just recently from Estes Park here in Colorado. Thanks for being here. All of you, thanks so much for being here. Our agenda for today is we're going to address what challenges that you face specifically in your respiratory system. when you arrive at altitude, what exactly breathwork training is, what does the research literature have to say about breathwork training and its altitude endurance implications. We're also going to get some of your own breath assessments. So you're going to walk out of this webinar with an idea on how it is that you breathe using some hard and fast actual assessments on your breathing. You're also going to get a taste of our breathwork training program. And then I'll leave you with some ideas on what you can do with this information and go from here on and off into the distance into the mountains. Okay, sound good to everybody? Great. So just a little bit of background on who I am. I know Mary gave a little bit of an introduction there. She mentioned something called the Nasal Marathon, which I will talk about in a second. But I'm the founder of a company called Recal, which is short for recalibrate, as in recalibrate the way that we breathe and the way that we train. And we have our origins in combining mindfulness with adventure travel. And when we started to run our adventure travel retreats, what we found was our clients, for better or for worse, maybe people like yourselves on this webinar, the type of adventure travel that we like to do is summiting mountains. And the type of mindfulness that ended up clicking the best with this type of clientele was breathwork training. And so what I did to better serve those clients over the course of the origin of our company was I started to dive more like the Wim Hof method was sort of my first dip into breathwork training. If you know the Wim Hof method or you practice the Wim Hof method, give me a hand inside the Zoom here or a thumbs up. Then from the Wim Hof method, I went into the world of oxygen advantage. I see tons of hands raised, so that's cool. Lots of people know the Wim Hof method. If you know the oxygen advantage, I would also like to hear from you. That is breathwork training more for sport and performance purposes. And there's this little subset of the oxygen advantage called high altitude simulation style breathwork training. And that ultimately is the rabbit hole that I went down into over the course of my 3 certifications that I got in breathwork training. And ultimately, through a lot of trial and error and innovation, created the high altitude breathwork training program. Now, as Mary had said right when we started, I, of course, appreciated the theory behind high altitude simulation breathwork training, respiratory muscle training, and all the ins and outs of that. I liked what the literature would show, obviously, but I'm a guy that I guess, for better or for worse, needs to try certain things out on myself and on my own body. And the first way in which I did that was something called the nasal marathon, where I ran a marathon and I trained for that marathon, not by running, but by doing breathwork training only. Prior to the marathon, I had never run more than 6 miles at a time in my life. When I ran the marathon, I taped my mouth shut and I breathed entirely through my nose for the duration of the marathon. Proud to say I finished. Proud to say I learned a lot about the endurance specific adaptations that you can make in your body using breathwork training. And those are the types of things that we now apply into our breathwork training program. But I didn't stop at the marathon, which was, by the way, close to sea level. I then trained for multiple months at sea level, excuse me, multiple weeks at sea level, and then took the breathwork training to the test by first climbing a 14er to see what type of adaptations you can make at that type of altitude. Then I've gone above and beyond 14ers. We've now tested it with mountain guides, IFMGA certified guides around the world, mountain athletes, both professional and recreational, and even had some guinea pig people put their hand in the air and test it out on different group expeditions, things like Cotopaxi, various treks and expeditions in Peru and at Aconcagua. And ultimately, all of this experimentation brought us to launching our program about a year ago, which in the last year now, we've had hundreds of people do the high altitude breathwork training program with great results on the mountain. So that's enough about me. Let's pause for a moment and everybody together, we will do a little breath assessment. This will be your first of 2 breath assessments that we'll do on the webinar, carbon dioxide tolerance test. Now, the way that this works is from a seated position. So if you're standing or even if you're walking, watching this webinar, go ahead and take a seat. What we're going to do is take just a normal breath in through your nose, a normal breath out. Then we're going to take a really deep breath. You're going to fill up your lungs as much as you possibly can. And when you reach the top of that inhale, I'm going to start a timer. You begin a slow exhale, as slow as you can possibly make it, ideally through your nose. It's just like you're letting air barely leak out of your nose, and you're trying to extend the exhale for as long as you possibly can. When you get to the point that you need to take a new breath, maybe you've run out of air in your lungs, so that also means you'll get to the point that you squeeze every last bit of air out of your lungs. When you get to that point that you need to take a new breath, take a look at the time that's on the screen, and that is going to be your CO2 TT score. Okay? So, everybody with me, from a seated position, go ahead and take a normal breath in through your nose and a normal breath out. And now begin a deep inhale. Fill up your lungs as much as you can. Fill up, fill up, fill up. And now begin that slow exhale. Again, you're going to try to extend this exhale as long as you can. So exhale as little amount of air as possible, but make it one continuous exhale. Try to work with that stress of breathlessness that might be building as you're doing this. You can swallow if you need to swallow. Sometimes that's an involuntary reaction. Get to the point that you squeeze every last bit of air out of your lungs. I'll let the timer run for another 20 seconds or so. If you're done, no problem. Just come back to normal breathing. Just a little while longer. All right. If you're still exhaling, thumbs up to you. If not, great. Go ahead and take a note on what the time was on the screen when you had to take a new breath, and that is your personal carbon dioxide tolerance test. Now, you might be asking yourself, what does that mean? How good was my CO2? Well, and lastly, how can I actually improve on this assessment? What does it mean and how can I improve, right? My answer to you, unfortunately, for now, is stick around and find out. We will be addressing those questions as we go. So let's jump into the challenges that you will face, and maybe you've already faced them at altitude, specifically in your respiratory system. I do want to make a disclaimer though. I am not a medical doctor here. I'm obviously trained in one very specific but tiny slice of the pie that is what happens to your body when you arrive at altitude. And I always recommend consulting your doctor before heading off into altitude, and obviously trusting a great company like AAI along the way when you're analyzing what's going on with your body at altitude. So with that being said, let's talk about what happens in the respiratory system at altitude. The first thing that you may start to notice in your body, and a lot of people do, is an increase in your ventilation. In other words, it's a fancy way of saying how many breaths that you take per minute. One of the underlying reasons behind why that's happening is because the air, as you go up and up and up in altitude, becomes thinner. Basically, that means there's lower pressure air. So in any volume of space that you inhale when you're rising up in altitude, that volume of space has a bit less oxygen than, say, down at sea level. And what happens in your body is the ventilatory centers, chemoreceptors, typically in the brain stem, but also some in the carotid as well, they start to realize that there's less oxygen being inhaled per breath. And what they do is they respond in the body, obviously by forcing you to start to breathe more often. And that actually sets off a cascade of physiological changes in the body, which one of those is an increase in your hemoglobin concentration. So this is the second piece of this puzzle of what happens to your body at altitude. Over time, that time known as acclimatization, there's an increase in your red blood cell count, hemoglobin concentration. Now, again, as I mentioned, this does take time. And thank you, by the way, for those of you sending some questions up into the chat. We're taking note of those, and I'm going to do my best to address a lot of those here at the end. Okay, so thank you for that. Now, the third thing that's happening here in your body is that you may experience a decrease in your oxygen saturation levels, specifically in your blood. So if you're at altitude and you put on something like a pulse oximeter onto your finger, you may start to notice that your blood oxygen saturation levels, or SpO2, starts to go down. As a result of your SpO2 going down, or in other words, your total maximal oxygen uptake capacity. Some of you may know that as your VO2 max. This typically decreases when you arrive at altitude. So all of these factors between the heart, the lungs, the air, the red blood cells, etc., these are the types of challenges that you may face, three kind of high-level top ones that you may face when you arrive at altitude. So great. I just threw some challenges at you. What in the world does breathwork training have to do with this? So let's make that connection. Going right back to where we started here, addressing each of these three areas of the challenges that we face at altitude. The breathwork training, most breathwork training programs, at least one specifically targeted toward altitude endurance, like the ones that we coach here at Recal, have three sides to them, okay? The first side is simply trying to clean up your breathing habits and make them more mechanically efficient. So mechanical efficiency is side number one of breathwork training. Side number two of breathwork training is doing exercises that are specifically targeting making adaptations in your body that may help you when you arrive at altitude. The last category of breathwork training is respiratory muscle training. And this one is a bit of a juggernaut here, where we're actually strengthening the muscles, in particular the diaphragm muscles, as well as your intercostal muscles, and a bit of the abdomen as well, especially on the exhalation. Training those muscles, kind of like Alex was saying in that little column that we started with in Outside Magazine, training those muscles before heading to altitude. So we're going to dive into each of these three areas more deeply so that you have a deeper understanding of how they actually can train your body to address those challenges that we face. So the first side is mechanical efficiency. So what can you do with breathwork training as it relates to mechanical efficiency? So number one, breathwork training can help fix bad habits that you may or may not even knowingly have developed over time with your breathing. This is where things like those assessments come into play. And it can help improve your efficiency then of your breathing. If there's one equation that I want you to take away from this webinar, it's this equation. When it comes to a mechanically efficient breath, that means that you're breathing with your nose, you're breathing fully, and you're breathing low. Breathe through your nose, breathe in full breaths, not short, shallow breaths, and then breathe low. We want to engage the diaphragm and breathe low into the belly. This is the key equation when it comes to breathing at any point on the mountain, okay? Number two, breathwork training can also help eliminate the impact of dead space with each and every breath. This is basically the space between your nose and the bottom of your lungs where most of your gas diffusion, gas, aka oxygen getting into the bloodstream, diffuses into your bloodstream in the low part of the lungs. We can eliminate the impact that dead space has with each and every breath. This is the space between your nose and the top of your chest. This is completely unused air. So breathing mechanically efficiently can eliminate the impact of that dead space. We can also increase and then use the increased lung capacity that you can achieve during breathwork training. You also can learn how to properly engage the muscles that are designed to do your breathing to actually do your breathing. This is going to more or less increase your breathing economy and ultimately your movement economy. How much energy are you expending as you're climbing at altitude? And lastly, you can eliminate overbreathing, which I'll dive more deeply into here in just a moment. But just know that overbreathing actually does the opposite than what you may think that it does, which is oxygenating your body more efficiently. It does the opposite. And I'll talk about how that's the case here shortly. So let's take a moment to dive into just one specific study that was done on mechanically efficient breathing at altitude. And this study was published in the PLOS One journal, a peer-reviewed journal in the world of exercise physiology. This study was done with lowlanders, as they call them. Not that anybody living at sea level is a lowly person of any kind, but these lowlanders traveled to 4,600 meters and 5,400 meters. And when at those altitudes, they had their blood oxygen saturation levels, or SpO2, assessed during 15 minutes of mechanically efficient breathing, also known as slow, deep breathing, right? Remember, nose, full, and low. That is a mechanically efficient breath. And to conclude, what they found was just by changing the way that somebody breathes to something more mechanically efficient, you can increase, well, at the end of the day, you're actually decreasing less, but effectively, you're increasing your SpO2 by 7.6% to 9.3% as a result of this particular study. There's actually a study we're going to talk about here shortly as well that backs up a lot of this information at the same time. So 7.6 to 9.3% of extra SpO2, I will gladly sign up for that when I arrive at altitude just by changing the way in which I breathe. Okay, so that's the mechanically efficient side of the equation for breathwork training. Now let's talk about what you can do from a breathwork training standpoint to address making adaptations in your body at altitude. So there's a very specific set of exercises in the world of breathwork training called intermittent hypoxic hypercapnic training. Now, some of you may be very familiar with the word hypoxic. That means low oxygen. The second word here, hypercapnic, means high carbon dioxide. So high CO2 specifically in the blood. This category of training exercises is also known as high altitude simulation. So you're simulating a high altitude environment of you trekking at high altitude. By doing this type of breathwork training, you can increase your hemoglobin concentration. And if you increase that, then you can increase your total oxygen uptake capacity, known as VO2 max. And you can do this from anywhere in the world. We'll talk about a study here shortly that actually shows this specific result. But secondly, by doing IHHT, intermittent hypoxic hypercapnic training, you can also increase your carbon dioxide tolerance. This is maybe the second most important thing that I want you to take away from this webinar. So remember the first one? NFL, think football. No. Think nose, full, and low. NFL is the equation to breathe. The second most important thing I want you to take away from this webinar is the concept of CO2 tolerance. So when you breathe, or even specifically when you hold your breath, so go ahead and hold your breath right now. Ideally, you're not driving or anything at this moment. Hold your breath. And as you hold your breath, I'm going to continue to talk. You may notice that when you're holding your breath, you're not exhaling that breath. What gas comes out when you exhale? Carbon dioxide, right? If you can train your carbon dioxide tolerance, by the way, for those of you holding your breath, go ahead and breathe normally again. But you get my picture. That stressful feeling of breathlessness is a result of not allowing your body to offload CO2. It is not related, at least in this short of a moment, to your oxygen levels. Okay? Most people say when they hold their breath, I needed oxygen. No, what you need to do is offload carbon dioxide. If you can increase your tolerance to carbon dioxide, you'll feel less out of breath when you're climbing or when you're exercising at home. Number two, you will decrease something very special called RPE, which is the rate of perceived exertion. Your breathing rate is specifically tied to how your body and your mind think that you're exerting. That has a direct connection to somebody's endurance. A lot of research and study has shown that point. So if you feel less out of breath, You then can decrease your RPE. You'll unlock more endurance. But ultimately, this last point is very, very important as well. This is the overbreathing point that I talked about. If you do not have a good carbon dioxide tolerance, what's going to happen is you are going to end up overbreathing. There's a unique part of your breathing system that relates to the hemoglobin in your red blood cells. So as you can see on the screen there, these little circles are red blood cells. Inside that red blood cell is a protein called hemoglobin. The hemoglobin is your carrier of oxygen throughout your body. So it runs up to your lungs. It gets the oxygen that just diffused into your bloodstream. It latches onto that. And there's a connection between that oxygen molecule and your hemoglobin in the red blood cell. That connection in an environment that is a high pH environment, so something that's more alkaline, that connection is much stronger. Well, when you overbreathe or you breathe very often, you offload CO2. The result of that to the pH of your blood is that it goes up. You become more alkaline. So the connection between your oxygen and your hemoglobin becomes very strong, and therefore the hemoglobin is not going to release the oxygen out of the bloodstream and into the muscle tissue or organ tissue in general that needs it. This is vitally important at altitude. Whereas if you are not overbreathing, you're breathing still under control in a slower rate than a very fast, pantic, almost hyperventilation style breathing, the pH in your blood is going to go down. Therefore, the connection between the hemoglobin and your oxygen molecule decreases. Therefore, it's going to release oxygen more easily and therefore distribute oxygen throughout your body. This is a very important concept that's known as the Bohr effect, B-O-H-R, Bohr effect, and it has to do with oxygenating your body. So I know I'm throwing a lot of science at you. Hold on for just a minute longer here. We're going to look at a brief study that was done on this style of breathwork training, known as IHHT, intermittent hypoxic hypercapnic training, and its impact on the concentration of the hemoglobin in your blood and subsequent VO2 max. After a group of individuals did IHHT 30 to 45 minutes for 3 times a week over the course of 8 weeks, what they found was an increase of 5.35% of hemoglobin in their blood, which resulted in a nearly 11% increase in VO2 max. So when it comes to addressing that challenge that your body faces, number one, with acclimatization on the mountain, which the hemoglobin is naturally already starting to build, but before you even arrive on the mountain, as you can see from sea level, which is where the study was, you can actually start to increase your hemoglobin concentrations. And this will then combat that challenge of decreased aerobic power and VO2 max on the mountain. Okay, lots of science, I know. Let's take a moment and do a second breath assessment now. So once again, from a seated position, or even this one if you're standing is fine, but ideally from a seated position, let's look at a breath assessment called LOM, which stands for location of movement in your breathing. So what I invite you to do here on this is put one hand up on your chest and one hand on your lower belly. And what I want you to do is look down the front of your body. And as you do that, just take a couple of normal breaths, no different than you normally would. As you're breathing here, just take a note of where you notice the movement happening when you breathe. Do you feel it in your chest? Can you feel some movement happening in your shoulders? Do you feel some movement in your lower belly? Just take a note to yourself on where you notice that movement happening. And if you want to, in the chat, you can even drop a note of where you actually felt the movement happening. We can split movement of breathing into 3 different zones. Zone 1 is the lower belly diaphragmatic area. Zone 2 is the middle of the chest, rib cage area. Zone 3 is upper chest, clavicle area, shoulder area. And I see a few ones right out of the gate. And then we got a 3. That's okay. Diancia, okay, we've got a 3. That's all right. Thanks for admitting. No, Laura, same thing. All good. So in this assessment, all that we're trying to do is assess where we notice the breathing, right? Anybody want to take a guess? You probably already know based on things I've talked about. But anybody want to take a guess at which one is the most optimal location to be breathing? If you said to yourself, zone 1, and I see a bunch of zone 1s, yes. I'm sorry, it is just so obvious here. Zone 1 is the answer of where we want to breathe most often to get the most gas diffusion into the bloodstream and also be engaging the muscles that are designed to do your breathing, right? Oh, probably zone 1. Is that what the green means in my diagram versus red? Yes. So that's a little of your second self-assessment. Now, let's talk about the first assessment once again, because I promised I would tell you how you might have scored on that. This is a little table that actually has 3 different breath assessments, but we only did one, which is the one highlighted more in bold here down the middle, the CO2 TT. So if the time that was on the screen when you had to take that new breath was between a 20 and a 40, we've got some work to do. If it was between a 40 and a 60, that's okay, but still not quite at that threshold that I like to see clients at, which is above a 60. If you're doing a CO2 TT and you last 60 seconds to 80 seconds, that's a good range. Thumbs up to you. If you've got a really high altitude expedition coming up, I really like to get our clients above an 80 on the CO2 TT. Now, you might be wondering what these other assessments are: the BOLT, which stands for Body Oxygen Level Test, and then an MBT, which stands for Maximum Breathlessness Test. Those are other assessments, which I'll provide you a link at the end of the webinar, which you can learn more about, watch some videos, and that kind of thing to be able to assess your breathing there. But for the sake of time, we just did the one CO2 TT. For those of you commenting on the fact that this is dysfunctional breathing, I didn't come up with the names that are used on this chart, okay? I have to credit Oxygen Advantage for this, not myself. I may have come up with something less harsh sounding if I had made it. But nonetheless, it's a good way to know where you're at with your own breathing. So let's dive back in to where we were. And this is in that last category of breathwork training, addressing that challenge that we face, which is a decrease in oxygen saturation in your blood. So we can address this by using respiratory muscle training exercises. And when I say that, I'm specifically referring to primarily your diaphragm muscle, which is that dome-shaped muscle just beneath the lungs. It's connected to your entire rib cage as well as your spine in the back, as you can see in the image there on the screen. And when you inhale, it flattens out, and when you exhale, it domes back up. That's your primary breathing motor muscle. Secondarily, we've got intercostal muscles, which are the muscles in between each rib bone and the rib cage. And then on the exhalation, we've got the abdomen muscles. With respiratory muscle training, you can maintain a higher blood oxygen saturation. And I'll get into how and why that's the case here in just a moment by taking a look at a study. You can also not increase your muscle fatigue. I hope not, at least. You'll be able to decrease your respiratory muscle fatigue that you'll face at altitude. You then also can increase your ability to adapt on the mountain during acclimatization. And lastly, you'll be able to improve your breathing economy, which inherently means you'll be expending less energy to be able to move through the mountains, which will decrease your rate of perceived exertion, which again is out, especially in our training, we focus both on inspiratory muscles as well as expiratory. That means inhale and exhale muscles. Let's take a brief look here at a study done on respiratory muscle training, specifically inspiratory muscle training and its impact on blood oxygen saturation, SpO2, while at altitude. In this study, a group expedition that was done in the Himalayas. Before arriving for the expedition, these test subjects, twice a day for 4 weeks, did inspiratory muscle training. Specifically, it was a 50% air-resisted inhalation training. They used a device called the Power Breathe. If you've ever used something like these altitude masks or even Bass Rutten's O2 trainer, something like this, just something that can resist the inhale. That is the type of device that they used. But of course, if you don't have any of those, you can achieve 50% air resistance by using this device right here, your finger. Block one nostril, that's about 50% air resistance, right? So this is a way that you can do inspiratory muscle training. Anyway, these test subjects did this before their expedition. And then when they were climbing, they were tested at rest and saw what happened to their SpO2 at elevations of sea level, 400 meters, 1,400 meters, and then 4,880 and 5,500. So for starters, as a result of that 4 weeks worth of inspiratory muscle training, they saw an increase in their inhalation strength, which is done by a metric called MIP, mouth inhalation pressure. Their inhalation strength increased by 15%. So that's great, but how exactly did that translate then to the mountain? What they saw was there was no change below 4,880 meters. Now there's a big gap that they did between 1,400 and 4,880. I bet something was happening in between both of those, but nonetheless, we're looking at the hard data here. What they found though, 4,880 meters and above, they found an increase in the SpO2 levels of the subjects that actually did this training by 6% on average, and as much as 10% in some of the individuals. So if you recall back to that first study we looked at, just by changing the way that you breathe, you can get between a 7.6 and a 9.3% increase in your SpO2. Now we're looking at a study where they didn't change the way that they breathed at all. They just strengthened their muscles beforehand, and they experienced a 6% on average increase in SpO2. Now, if you put those two things together, you actually train and then you also change the way you breathe on the mountain. And have seen these types of improved results in their blood oxygen saturation levels. So enough with all of the studies now. Let's talk about something a little bit more practical, a little bit more useful here, right? Not that that isn't practical, but you get what I'm saying. Let's bring it out of the quote unquote lab and into the real world. And this is how and where we created the high altitude breathwork training program, which specifically is a 5-week training program designed to be done during the pre-acclimatization block of fitness. That's the last 5 weeks before an expedition. By the way, you can start certain parts of this training at any point in time, even if you have an expedition that's coming up in a year, you can certainly start with some of this. But the full training program as a cohesive unit is designed to be done just before your expedition. Over the course of the last year, as I mentioned, we've had hundreds of athletes, guides, group expeditions, IFMGA folks, and doctors actually do this type of training, and these are some of their reactions to it. We've also been now featured in the media in various ways, and some of the challenges that people have taken on using breathwork training to do so. So with that being said, let's actually do some of the breathwork training now, as I promised that we would. Let's start with an exercise called that is specifically geared toward CO2 tolerance training, which, if you recall, this is one of the big takeaways that I want you to walk away with here, is training your CO2 tolerance means that you will feel less out of breath when you're training, but also on the mountain. And this specific exercise that we'll do here is called Breathe Light. So I'm going to coach you through this now. From a seated position, once again, go ahead and take your index finger, or your pointer finger, place it just beneath your nose, relax your shoulder and your elbow to your side. We don't want to hold a lot of tension up there. And take a few normal breaths in and out through your nose. And just notice the air as it runs across your finger on the way in and it runs back out across your finger on the way out. Again, these are just a few normal breaths. Maybe you notice more warmth in the air as it comes out. Maybe you notice some more moisture in the air as it comes out through your nose. Now, once you get a feel for what normal breathing feels like here, keep your finger here and start to breathe lighter than you normally would. Hence the name of this exercise called Breathe Light. I want you to breathe so light that you can barely feel the air on your finger as you breathe through your nose. And as you're doing this, you may start to notice this feeling of air hunger building. The feeling of air hunger is that feeling that we want to take a much bigger breath, right? That feeling of air hunger, simply put, is a sign that carbon dioxide is rising in the blood and we're not giving our body the opportunity to exhale that CO2. Do your best and stick with that very light, slow breathing for another 30 to 45 seconds or so. This is challenging, I know. That feeling of CO2 in the blood is tough. We want to straddle that line between comfort and discomfort here. If at any point in time your breathing becomes erratic, maybe at the top of the inhale or at the bottom of the exhale, if you can't control the breathing, maybe you're breathing just too slow for you to handle right now in your training, take a couple of normal breaths to regain control and then come back to very light breathing. Stay here for just about 10 more seconds with me. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good. Go ahead and release your nose. Give yourself the satisfaction of a couple of normal breaths here. In fact, you could even do a couple of physiological sighs to offload CO2 very quickly. That's a double inhale through the nose and an exhale through the mouth. So go ahead and take an inhale through your nose. Pause just for a moment. Sniff in again through your nose. Exhale through your mouth. Let's do one more of those. Inhale. Pause. Sniff. Exhale. You may notice, whew, that calmed you down pretty quickly. It is one of the single fastest way to offload carbon dioxide out of the blood. I can explain the science maybe offline if someone wants to take note and ask that question, but just know that physiological sigh is a very quick way to regain control of your breathing. So let's take a look at a few other example exercises. I'm not necessarily going to coach you through these here, again, for the sake of time, but I want to talk you through these so that you have an idea on where you can start today, for example, in your own breathwork training. So let's look at some respiratory muscle training exercises, specifically inspiratory muscle training exercise. So we coach we coach a lot of different exercises around this. One of them is called the hook lying diaphragmatic breathing exercise. The way that this works is you get into a hook lying position, which is the position that the woman here on the screen is in. Your knees are at a 90-degree angle. You're flat on the ground. You can either have your hands up on your chest and belly, or you even could be blocking one nostril if you want to make it a little bit more challenging. You could even add some weight to your lower belly or a resistance band around your belly as well. Something like a Buteyko belt is the device that we recommend as part of our training. It's something that goes around the lower part of your rib cage and provides that resistance. All you have to do here is take strong inhalations through your nose with that air resistance if you have it, and then just passive exhalations. By doing this, you're training your diaphragm and secondarily your intercostal muscles to start to build strength, which, as we saw, makes a huge difference when it comes to altitude breathing. Number 2, let's talk about an expiratory muscle training exercise. And this one, even kids have fun doing it. This is called balloon breathing. From a seated position, all you have to do is breathe into a balloon and fill it up as many times as you can in, say, 1 minute. It's very important, though, from that seated position, not to be rocking back and forth when you do it. You want to have as much of a straight back as possible. And all of the pressure that's created to blow up this balloon is done with your abdomen. So I'm just going to do one as an example. I always love that sound. So you may have noticed not a lot of shoulder movement there. In fact, it probably didn't even look like I took a big breath, but all of the pressure was going here in the abdomen space. Also, I try to keep my face light and not tensed up when doing this. This is a great expiratory muscle exercise, and all you need is something like the average party balloon. The last exercise that I'll talk through here as an example is in that high altitude simulation category. Again, this is known as that intermittent hypoxic hypercapnic training side of the equation. And the way that this particular exercise works is it's a walk to jog variation. There's a lot of variations around how to do this style of training. But what you do is you basically take a normal breath in and a normal breath out. After that passive exhale, you pinch your nose and hold your breath and you begin walking. You walk until you reach a level of maybe medium to possibly strong air hunger, that feeling like you need to take a new breath. Now, this is a challenging moment of the exercise. Instead of actually breathing there, you turn it into a jog. And you jog as long as you can on that one breath. You can probably get an idea at how challenging this type of breathwork training is. Go as far as you can on that one breath. And then when you need to stop, well, when you need to breathe, go ahead and stop. But instead of taking big breaths, you try to minimize your breathing for just 6 breaths. Just basically like you're shuttling air in and out through your nose very lightly. This is going to likely contract your diaphragm muscle, which helps with that strength training of the diaphragm. And then after those 6 minimal breaths, you come back to some normal breathing. What this is going to do is it's going to simulate a hypoxic environment. Hopefully by a strong breath hold, you reach a level of hypoxia. If you are wearing a pulse oximeter, you can actually see that immediate feedback. But secondarily, you're starting to train your carbon dioxide tolerance through these breath holds. CO2 acts very quickly in building in the blood. This, again, is playing between hypoxic, hypercapnic, and this is where some of those great altitude adaptations can take place. So this is a lot of training before you arrive on the mountain. Let's talk a little bit about on the mountain type of protocols that we coach in our breathwork training. For example, just how to breathe, period. You might remember NFL, right? Nose full and low. We also coach exercises called recovery breathing that helps in between acclimatization hikes or even during training, other types of training that you're doing, and you just need those muscles to recover more quickly. You can use breathwork training for that. We also coach acute mountain sickness style of breathing, where if you start to feel some lighter symptoms from AMS, you can have a breathwork protocol that's going to help combat those symptoms. Now, take note, of course, if you feel any symptoms on the mountain at any time, always speak up about that and let your guides and your doctors on the expedition know. So briefly, I want to go through just a couple of case studies on how the breathwork training actually translated on the mountain. The first one, let's take a look at some expeditions at Aconcagua. Some of you may already know this, but a typical success rate down at Aconcagua in Argentina, which is nearly a 7,000 meter peak. It's the second highest of the 7 summits in the world. Typical success rate is between 30 and 35%. In our first season and working with one of the guiding companies down there, we had a 71% success rate for those that actually did this training before going and attempting to climb Aconcagua. And one individual case study here is a guy named Dave. In 2023, he did get HAPE while on the expedition and he was taken off the mountain. He trained using breathwork training over the course of 2024, leading up to the expedition. And in 2024, toward the tail end of the year, he had a successful summit. I'm very proud and happy to have gotten to know Dave and his journey around the training. Secondly, for a case study, I want to talk about Koh Sargang, which is a 6,000 meter peak peak in Pakistan. This was a story that was featured recently in adventure.com. A guy named Umar Latif did his training from nearly sea level in Lahore, Pakistan. And this is what he had to say about his experience training. Again, this was featured in adventure.com if you want to take a deeper dive into this particular case study. So you might be wondering, where can you go from here? So I want to discuss with you some of our free resources that we have for breathwork training, as well as some paid training options if you want to really dive into the deep end with breathwork training. The first thing, I have a special offer. This is a one-time 25-minute live stream coaching session that I would love to offer all of the attendees here on our webinar. Tomorrow morning at 6:30 Pacific time, 9:30 Eastern time, I am going to host here from Boulder a 25-minute live stream. If you're interested in joining that, you can RSVP at this QR code. If you want to scan that with your phone, you can do that. If you want to just shoot me an old-fashioned email at anthony@recaltravel.com, you can do that as well. That will get you signed up for this free training session that I want to offer all of you tomorrow morning. So I hope that feels good and feels right to all of you. If you haven't scanned the QR code, hurry up and do that because I am about to change the slide now. Secondly, a free option here for you is we put a ton of content, live stream coaching sessions, videos that actually show these exercises, coaching tips from me, all these FAQs that we receive all the time about breathwork training. And also it's a great community platform for all of our athletes and people training to climb high mountains, to finish races like the Leadville 100 and all of the ultra marathons in the mountains. This is the platform where we house all of that for our athletes in our community. So you can also scan and join that as well. Or of course, just email me. Now those are our free offerings out to you. We also have some paid training plans as well. There's 3 ways that you can train with our breathwork training program. The first way is the most robust way, which is personal training. So you can hire me for $875. I'm just putting the prices so that you have an idea on this, and actually get a personal coach and a program tailored to your needs and your expedition. The second way that you can train, and this is our most popular option, is the online video course. Thanks, Mary, for dropping that link. That's super helpful. The online video course, this is like the juggernaut. Everybody, so many people do this particular course. It's got all the videos, demos of these, and everything for you to be able to get the most out of your training. And then lastly, we do offer a more affordable option, the most accessible thing that we offer here, which is the self-guided version. And that includes a training workbook, and it has written descriptions of all the exercises. And that goes for $75. No matter what training plan you do, we also have an integrated training plan with Training Peaks. So if you already use the Training Peaks app for some of your fitness training, we fit right into that app for you. I also, lastly, want to offer this group of awesome humans some special offers here, and that is a group training plan special. So we have a group that's actually starting on Friday with the training. If you book the online training between now and Friday, again, that's the $275 package, for no extra cost, we'll throw you into the group training, which gets me one-on-one, well, not one-on-one, but one on the group, coaching you throughout the 5 weeks. So we'll actually set up some calls together. So it's a really added, big added value. So you'll train in the group, which is a similar value to like our personal coaching package. You can just email me as well if you're curious, but at that QR code, we've got resources for you to sign up for that. The second special offer here is a free advanced training session. We host advanced training sessions every single Monday. We've got a lot of members that do that. That membership's $85 a month. A drop-in is typically $30, but for you, I wanted to offer a free one-time pass for all of you to be able to join a training session. Again, if you just scan that QR code, we created a special landing page, recaltravel.com/AAI. That's the URL. And then lastly, if you want to find out if your breathing's expedition ready, you can book a free consultation with me as well. So I'm going to leave you with a little quote from a very special person. Her name is Lisa Thompson. She's the second ever USA woman to summit K2. She has experience in working firsthand with the Breathwork training program, but also she coaches a lot of athletes to do this as well. And she says, as both a high altitude climber and a coach preparing others for mountain adventures, I cannot overstate the value of the Breathwork training program. She's seen firsthand how this program helps athletes acclimatize more efficiently, recover faster, and perform their best. Recal's a game changer for anyone looking to optimize their experience in the mountains. I'm very happy and humbled for Lisa to say such a thing about the program. So with that, I will kick it into Q&A session, and I'll leave that QR code there and the link if you want to go ahead and book some of those resources that I put out there.
Oh my gosh, Anthony, that was awesome. Oh, we have a ton of questions. I did all of the exercises and realized that I am a horrible breather. So I'm excited to dive into some of the materials you have. I don't even know how I'm still alive. I'm just mouth breathing. All right.
Don't worry, Mary, you're not alone. For some reason, some things about our modern world have pushed us to deviate off of normal human breathing, especially using the nose. We're very stressed out humans these days, so we breathe often with the mouth and at higher rates than we should. And it is what it is. We're here to hopefully recalibrate, right?
Thank you. You are so kind. Shall we start the questions? Okay. What do we have so far? Does yoga breath work help and benefit climbing at elevation?
So when I hear yogic breathing, I honestly, I hear so many different types of things, and it means something different to a lot of people. And maybe it means something different to me than it does to you who asked the question. The first thing is, I feel that in yoga, using yogic breathing in general, we're bringing more conscious awareness to our breathing. And in particular, we're oftentimes closing the mouth, breathing through the nose. For starters, if you just do that walking out of this webinar, absolutely, it's going to help. If you have trained those habits in yoga, then you are a part of the way there. So that's great. Secondarily, if you're referring to maybe pranayama type of breath work exercises, right? Pranayama style things like the breath of fire, which is just kind of like an exhale pulsation, something like that. That's going to actually help strengthen the exhalation muscles, which is even a part of our breathwork training program. And there's a lot of slow breathing things, which helps train that carbon dioxide tolerance. So in short, yogic breathing in general, maybe depending on what you mean by that, but in general, yes, that's really helpful and additive to a breathwork training program.
Awesome answer. Another question from the chat and the Q&A box. Can you please elaborate on the relationship between breath work and heart rate?
Yeah, sure. So heart rate and respiratory rate are very closely linked. When you inhale, or even when you hold your breath after an inhale, I could go deep down into the science of what's happening underlying this, but just know that it picks up your heart rate. Okay? When you inhale and when you hold after an inhale. If you exhale more slowly and you even hold your breath after an exhale, that's going to actually decrease your heart rate. So these are the levers that you can pull with your breathing that can then impact your heart rate. If you want to extend your exhale slightly longer than you're inhaling for, you're going to, over time, drop your heart rate. What breathwork training is going to allow you to do is, I'm coming back to the same well over and over again. It's going to help train your carbon dioxide tolerance, which will enable you to keep your breathing rate more slow, which will then enable your heart rate to go down as well. So you can, using breathwork training, specifically carbon dioxide tolerance training side of the equation, you can help keep your heart rate slow by training that. Does that make sense?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
Very cool.
I hope so.
Let's see. Da, 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 da. Here is sort of a bit of a case study type question. This
Uh-huh.
person on the webinar had trouble sleeping above 18,000 feet. It seemed that when my breathing slowed while asleep, I woke up needing to breathe deeper. Will this
Yeah.
training help with that issue?
Okay. So for everybody out there, this is typically known as periodic breathing. Periodic breathing is a very unfortunate thing that happens to many people when they arrive at altitude and they're in that process of acclimatizing. At night, your breathing goes somewhat haywire. Either you're breathing too fast at times, and oftentimes that is what's happening when we're acclimatizing. We're breathing very, very fast. That offloads carbon dioxide. And remember when I said that CO2 is the trigger that causes you to breathe? If you offload CO2 for an extended period of time, you then go into periods of holding your breath where that trigger hasn't been stimulated yet. So periodic breathing, it's kind of like sleep apnea where you're holding your breath for 20, 30, 40, 50 seconds at a time. And then all of a sudden it hits you at once that you need to breathe. This is known as periodic breathing. And I have a really unfortunate answer to your question, which is I have not definitively found a way to overcome periodic breathing. There are CO2 tolerance training that you can do, which can help you control your breathing both while you're awake and hopefully through CO2 tolerance training, the chemoreceptor sensitivity has gone down. So you're not going to necessarily hyperventilate at times at night either. That can maybe smooth out the curve of periodic breathing, but in no way can I sit here and say, like, yeah, we nailed this one. You will never face periodic breathing again. That's truly not the way that works. Unfortunately, all I can say is budget time on the mountain for acclimatization. I always say don't sleep on acclimatization. Periodic breathing. I realize how tough it is, though.
Let's see. What do we have next? Okay, we had a lot of questions in the chat about pressure or pressurized breathing, something that Alpine Ascents guys talk about a lot, like on
Yeah,
Kilimanjaro and Denali. How does that connect to NFL in
yeah,
terms of your technique?
yeah. That's great. So, all right. Well, how does it connect to NFL? Let me back up one sec and just be clear so everybody understands maybe what pressure breathing looks like. So oftentimes people coach this style of breathing, and I don't necessarily have a good or bad thing to say about pressure breathing on its own. But basically, it's oftentimes tied with your steps, but more or less, it's exhaling through pursed lips. So kind of like you're blowing out of a straw, and you actually exhale with strength, getting the air out, and then allowing an inhale in once you've sort of gotten rid of a lot of the air out of your lungs. A, I don't feel there's anything wrong with recycling as much air as possible with each and every breath. You may have noticed when I say nose full and low, full means we're taking full breaths in, but it also means we're taking full breaths out. We want to recycle as much air with each and every breath as we can while at altitude because that full circulation in, full circulation out is going to eliminate the impact of dead space. Remember, dead space is that unused volume of air between your nose and the top of your lungs. That's air that doesn't get diffused into your bloodstream. So if we breathe through the nose, ideally, again, breathing through the nose, I saw a question on that. I want to address nose versus mouth breathing and the benefits there. But if we breathe fully in, fully out, and sure, you can use some pressure breathing at the end just to get that last bit of air out of the lungs. Totally fine. Let's recycle the air with each and every breath.
Very cool. All right, what do we have next? I've noticed there's a strong correlation between breath work and emotional response. How does this training impact the emotional response? For
Yeah.
example, I know there are certain breathing patterns that can calm the body and those that create a more lively, anxious state.
Yes. Great. This is a great question. Very, very real one for sure. Yeah, using your breathing, you can change the state of your body emotionally, mentally. You really are changing your overall nervous system response, parasympathetic, sympathetic, fight or flight, rest and digest. These are the waves of that you can go through with breathwork training. Question. When doing So there are different categories, as I mentioned, of the breathwork training. Things like respiratory muscle training, that's a little more traditional style of strength training. Yes, it's targeting breathing, but that's not necessarily going to fluctuate those emotional, psychological levels too much there. But on, say, something like our CO2 tolerance training, CO2 has a knack for being very stress inducing. So I do look at this training as both physical and mental resilience training. By training, for example, your carbon dioxide tolerance, you then are somewhat showing up in the ring and doing a few practice rounds of the stress that you're going to face while climbing at altitude. Um, and that doesn't just mean the breathing that you're going to face at altitude, which is going to feel sometimes panicky and on the borderline of hyperventilation at times. You're also going to face challenges on the mountains. And it's about how you can maybe use your breath as your friend in that situation and regain control not only of your breathing, but also of your mental state. There also are emotional responses that happen when you're breathing. Maybe this person that asked this question could have been doing something like the Wim Hof method, which is a very, very deep uh, breathwork training protocol. That by the way, in case some of you are wondering how and if we use the Wim Hof method, we actually do use a very small bit of the Wim Hof method in the very end of our 5-week training program, where we don't want to tax the body too much through uh, through a lot of movement and taxing the muscles before going on an expedition. But we do want to still train the CO2 tolerance and especially get a hypoxic response from the body. During the Wim Hof method, you do a lot of breathing and then you hold your breath because you offload all that carbon dioxide during strong breathing of Wim Hof method, during your breath hold, you don't have that trigger to breathe come for quite a while. That can result in very low oxygen levels in the blood. And that then can instigate a hypoxic response in the body. I hope all of this is making sense. If it's not, I can hopefully address this in more detail later. But that also can supercharge an emotional response. There's a lot of science and things behind what's happening behind the scenes in the Wim Hof method. Again, I feel that using breathwork training, it is like going into a practice session for your emotional regulation, for your mental resilience. And ultimately, I feel that those things are going to help with you when you take on a huge challenge like something in the mountains.
Thank you so much for that answer. That was awesome. Next, I know we're running out of time. I think we'll have time
Yeah.
to hopefully get through all of the questions. But if we don't, do not fret. We can find Anthony via email or on his website. Next is a 3-part question. So,
Okay.
part 1, why do you recommend breathing through your nose instead of mouth?
Okay.
Part 2, do you recommend taping your mouth shut so you will not breathe through it? And part 3, do you have any recommendations on devices to keep the nose more open, like nasal strips or, I don't know, like more tape or
Yeah.
something else like that? 3-part
Cool.
question.
Cool. I'll hopefully get to all 3 parts. But the first one I'm going to spend the most time on, which is why breathing through your nose versus your mouth. So this one is super important. So first of all, let's just take a look at the nose versus the mouth. There is nothing in your mouth that adapted over the many years that we evolved that is designed to do your breathing. It's designed to do your eating. So, whereas on the contrary, through your nose, we have developed a lot of adaptations over time. And I will speak to what some of those are. But just as a basic level, the mouth is for eating, the nose is for breathing. When we breathe through the nose, we send air through the nasal cavity, through our sinuses. This does a series of amazing things to the air when it comes in. The first thing that it does is it will humidify the air on the way in. So if we're breathing very dry air, especially the air that we face at high altitude, it's typically very dry, especially at a place like Aconcagua. Or any high altitude, that air is very dry. If we bring in directly into the lungs very dry air, over time, that's going to create inflammation, especially among our bronchi. What that's going to do is then create bronchoconstriction. If it becomes too inflamed, bronchoconstriction happens because it's like a survival response to the body. So when somebody says exercise-induced asthma or exercise-induced bronchoconstriction, it's typically a result of the dry air getting directly into the lungs, which means somebody is breathing through the mouth. The nose, however, will humidify the air on the way in. And secondly, it will warm the air on the way in. So if we're bringing in cold air, that nose is going to send it through the nasal, paranasal sinuses down into the lungs. It's going to warm the air on the way in. So it humidifies the air on the way in. It warms the air on the way in and gets it ready for best and most optimal diffusion into the bloodstream. It also creates resistance to the air as it comes in, which with that resistance, that then causes a reaction in the diaphragm to do more work, which if we use the diaphragm to do our breathing, and the bottom branches of your bronchi in your lungs are where the majority of gas diffusion actually takes place. So we want air deep into the lungs. So breathing through the nose, that resistance is going to push us almost to breathe in a zone 1 fashion, deep into the belly. It also filters the air on the way in. The mouth just brings it immediately in. So through the mucous membranes that's in our nasal cavity, that's going to filter the air. So it's doing so many important things when we breathe through the nose. I can't speak to that more highly. Now, on the second part of the question, do I recommend shutting my mouth? Yes, sometimes I would love to just shut my mouth. Um, and that is using mouth tape. I am guilty in that you can ask my partner Monica, who Mary you mentioned earlier on this. At night, every night, we better get our talking done early because that mouth is getting shut and I am taping my mouth. So I do tape my mouth shut at night. And if that was the nature of the question, I 100% do recommend taping the mouth during that really vital 6, 7, 8 hours of time that we can be doing proper breathing. I use something called MyoTape, which is a product done and created by Oxygen Advantage. I feel it's the best mouth tape that exists out there, MyoTape. I do work with Oxygen Advantage. I have a link that I can share out to you, which, full disclosure, I will. I do recommend this, but I also will get an affiliate commission from that. But it is the best mouth tape out there. But when you're on an expedition, do I recommend taping the mouth for that purpose or even during training? Generally, I would say no. Myotape actually has an opening near the lips, so you can drink some water. It's got some elasticity to it, so it keeps the lips shut, but allows you the chance to drink water if you need. But still, I don't really think that we need to go, you know, overboard with the taping of the mouth. I did it, of course, as an experiment. But to eat, if you get in a situation where you really need to offload CO2, do some physiological sighs and breathe through your mouth. That is okay. The last thing that I believe we asked was, do I recommend any devices? I'm going to show you a device that I sometimes use, especially when I'm running at high altitude, that will help maintain nasal breathing. And this is something called a nasal dilator. So it's a little dilator that goes into your nose. And this is going to look really nice as I put this on. And when it's in my nose, yeah, me and you are nose ring buddies, Mary. We this actually dilates the nose. So breathing in, I mean, it really makes in more air in my nose. So I do recommend a nasal dilator. Yes, a little like nasal strip, if you wear those types of tape, that can work as well. those are useful additions for that.
Wow, very cool. Taping your mouth while you sleep. I'm so intrigued, but also I'm kind of afraid I would die in my sleep. Well, I'm sure you'd wake up for that,
You would.
but
This isn't duct tape at the end of the day. This is like flexible tape
okay,
that we can easily get off and even breathe through the mouth if you really need to.
very nice. Okay, we have just let's do two more questions. Anthony, you have time for two more questions?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Bring it on.
Okay, this going back to nose breathing. When solely breathing through my nose, there are times when I feel a burning sensation from like the cold or the dry air. Uh,
Mm.
do you have any strategies for helping out or eliminating that sort of cold, dry air nose sensation?
My recommendation is breathing through the nose is like a muscle. If we don't use it over time, we lose it. And this is maybe not the answer that this person might have really wanted out of this, but that feeling of the cold air, for example, inside your nose, that becomes less and less if we just build more tolerance toward the cold air with the nose. And I totally know that feeling. It's almost like you're getting a brain freeze, like you drank a really cold liquid very quickly when you breathe through your nose. Just over time, you're going to build more tolerance to that. At the end of the day, think of it this way. When you're inhaling in that cold air, do you want that cold air to be received immediately by your lungs? Or do you want that cold air to be received by your nasal, your sinuses area, processed through that first, and then sent into the lungs? This is again where that inflammation can occur in your airways if you bring that cold air directly into the lungs. Um, I do sometimes wear a buff that I throw over my nose, which can help a little bit in keeping some of the air right around my nose a little bit warmer. It can just take the edge off. So that's kind of a recommendation that I do have. But other than that, it's just a practice type of thing. Over time, you'll start to build more tolerance to it.
Yeah, good point. You don't want that cold, dry air going straight shot to the lungs.
Yeah.
Not ideal.
Yeah.
Okay, one final question. This is also a question that I have. Uh, is it a sign of overexertion, or do I need to slow down my pace if I feel overly compelled to intake air through my mouth? Like, for example, like you're out for a run and you want to do nose breathing. You're like, oh, just like Anthony taught me, nose breathing, nose breathing, nose breathing. But it feels like it's a
Yeah.
little bit, you have to breathe through your mouth because you're overexerting yourself.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that conundrum?
Yeah, that's okay. Those are my thoughts. Like it's I'm sorry, it's just so simple. When I for example, when I trained using breathwork training to then run the marathon, in that nasal marathon, that was I was using my nose only for 8 to 9 months during exercise. And by the way, when I say only, I mean, I started only, but at different intensity levels, I then had to resort to mouth breathing. It's just the way that it goes. But over time, you build that CO2 tolerance. So if you start the exercise breathing through your nose and you reach the point you have to switch to mouth breathing, that's okay. That's just where your CO2 tolerance is at today. But maybe in a few weeks, it's going to be different. Maybe in a few months, it's going to be different. This is where those breath assessments come into play as well. Like that carbon dioxide tolerance test, if you do that, you can get a feel for where your CO2 tolerance is at today. And then in a week, in a month, in a few months, over time, do that assessment again, and you'll be able to see where you're at there. By the way, I just thought of something as it relates to these breath assessments. There are a few factors that can influence your own assessments, so maybe don't feel too bad if you came out in a certain range on that score that you didn't like. Things like how much caffeine you've had so far today, have you eaten and started that metabolism process, um, what elevation that you're at can also play a role in these breath assessments. So that table that I showed isn't like just the end all be all by any means. This is always about where did you start and where did you end. And When it comes to nasal breathing versus mouth breathing, just do your best, and over time, your body will start to adapt.
Excellent. Wise words. Now we will not feel bad for resorting to mouth breathing. Over
That's right.
time, process. Great. Well, I think we have answered a lot of the questions. We didn't quite get to all of them, but I know that some of you have to get back to your lunch or office work. Anthony, thank you so much for this awesome presentation. I saw like a ton of love in the chat. People are really psyched. It was really informative. I know I am ready to change my mouth breathing ways and hopefully not sunburn the roof of my mouth anymore, which I have done in the past. Very embarrassing. This webinar has been recorded. It'll be up on the Alpine Ascents blog in a couple of days. So if you didn't take notes, don't worry, there's a lot of great information in there. So always refer to it later. Anthony, is it possible that you could reshare the QR code for the 5-week training before we wrap up, or maybe send me a link? Someone was asking for it and I couldn't quite find it.
Yeah. Yeah, no worries. So I created a landing page specifically for you all on this webinar. So it's got all the resources that you will need. So if you go to that site that I just dropped into the chat, go there. It's going to have all the training options. It's also going to have, your option to redeem that free 25-minute breathwork training session tomorrow morning, but also our advanced one that happens every Monday. You can book that consultation there. So it's everything that I ever offered exists at that link.
Oh my gosh, that's so helpful. Thank you so much. Okay, before I let you go, enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. One final question from me to you. If someone wanted to take the very first step into breathwork training, let's say 5 minutes from now, what is the thing you'd recommend that they would do? Absolute.
Shut your mouth.
There you have it.
that is the answer, people. It's shut your mouth, because that is going to start to again engage the diaphragm more, which you'll be doing little by little, more strength training on the diaphragm. You will start to train your carbon dioxide tolerance, which over time will allow you to feel less out of breath when you're exercising. And then that is the foundation. At the end of the day, that's the foundation, because only once we fix those mechanically inefficient habits that we built over time can we then build on the really hard stuff, right? Which is the breathing that you need to go tackle the world's highest mountains. So it's as simple as shut your mouth.
Shut your mouth. Heard it here first. Well, with that, thank you again for tuning in. Do check out the blog for this webinar recording. And Anthony, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. Take care, everybody.